Tonight, close your eyes and travel back to a world without supermarkets, electricity, or modern kitchens. A world where every meal depended on the weather, the soil, and the rising sun. Imagine waking in a medieval village, the soft crackle of a hearth fire glowing in the darkness, the smell of fresh bread slowly baking, and a pot of stew quietly simmering after hours of patient cooking. What did ordinary people really eat every single day hundreds of years ago? Was life filled with grand feasts, or simple bowls shared around flickering firelight? As we journey into medieval times, you'll discover the surprising foods that sustained kings, peasants, monks, and travelers alike. Meals shaped by survival, faith, and nature itself. So relax, breathe slowly, and let the sounds of history guide you into a calm and peaceful sleep, as we uncover what people truly ate every day in the medieval world. In medieval times, food was not simply a matter of taste or preference, but a direct reflection of survival, geography, class hierarchy, religion, season, and labor. What people ate every day depended heavily on whether they were peasants working the land, craftsmen living in towns, monks inside monasteries, or nobles residing in castles. For most people across Europe between roughly the 5th and 15th centuries, daily meals were simple, repetitive, and dictated by what could be grown locally or preserved through harsh winters. The majority of the population were peasants, and their diet formed the foundation of medieval eating habits. Bread was the single most important food. Nearly every meal revolved around bread, which varied greatly in quality depending on wealth. Poor peasants ate dark, coarse bread made from rye, barley, oats, or mixed grains known as maslin, while the wealthy consumed soft white wheat bread, considered a symbol of status and refinement. Bread was so central that wages, taxes, and even charity were often measured in loaves. Alongside bread, people consumed pottage almost daily. Pottage was a thick stew cooked slowly over a fire, made by boiling grains, vegetables, and sometimes small amounts of meat or bones when available. This dish could simmer for hours or even days, with ingredients continuously added as new food became available. Cabbage, onions, leeks, peas, beans, carrots, turnips, and herbs commonly went into the pot. For many families, pottage was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The flavor changed slightly depending on season or luck, but the structure remained the same. Meat was rare for peasants, and usually reserved for feast days or special occasions. Chickens were more valuable for eggs than for eating, and cows were primarily used for milk and labor rather than slaughter. Dairy products played a major role in daily nutrition. Milk, butter, and cheese were staples, particularly in rural communities. Cheese was extremely important because it could be preserved for long periods, making it essential during winter months when fresh food was scarce. Fresh milk spoiled quickly, so it was often turned into butter or cheese soon after milking. Buttermilk and whey were commonly consumed drinks among the lower classes. Eggs were also widely eaten because chickens required relatively little maintenance and provided a consistent source of protein. Grains beyond bread were also central to medieval diets. Oatmeal, porridge, and gruels made from barley or oats were eaten frequently, especially in colder regions where wheat did not grow well. These meals were filling and provided energy for long hours of physical labor in fields or workshops. Medieval people required high-calorie diets because daily life involved intense manual work from farming and blacksmithing to construction and textile production. Even children participated in labor, and food served primarily as fuel rather than indulgence. Vegetables were far more common than meat. Gardens near homes supplied onions, garlic, cabbage, spinach, beet greens, peas and beans. Wild plants such as nettle, sorrel, and dandelion greens were gathered from fields and forests to supplement meals. Contrary to modern assumptions, medieval peasants often ate a surprisingly plant-heavy diet. Fruits such as apples, pears, plums, cherries, and berries were eaten fresh during harvest seasons or preserved through drying and fermentation. Nuts like hazelnuts and walnuts added fats and nutrients. Preservation methods were crucial because refrigeration did not exist. Drying, salting, pickling, smoking, and fermenting allowed food to last through winter. Fish held special importance due to religious rules. The medieval Christian calendar imposed numerous fasting days when meat was forbidden, sometimes accounting for nearly half the year. During these times, fish replaced meat entirely. Coastal communities relied heavily on fresh fish, while inland populations consumed salted or dried varieties such as herring, cod, and eel. Monasteries became experts in fish farming, maintaining ponds stocked with carp and other species specifically for fasting seasons. Even peasants far from the sea might eat preserved fish regularly because trade networks transported salted seafood long distances. Drink choices reveal another surprising aspect of medieval life. Water was often unsafe in densely populated areas, so people drank ale or small beer daily, including children. These beverages contained low alcohol levels and were safer because boiling during brewing killed harmful bacteria. Ale was not a luxury, but a nutritional staple, providing calories and hydration. Wealthier households drank wine, particularly in southern regions where vineyards thrived. Mead made from fermented honey was also consumed, though less commonly than ale. Monasteries and large estates frequently brewed their own beverages, making alcohol production part of everyday domestic activity. The diet of the nobility contrasted sharply with that of peasants. Wealthy families enjoyed access to abundant meat, spices, and imported goods. Venison, beef, pork, lamb, goose, swan, and game birds appeared frequently on noble tables. Hunting was both a sport and a privilege reserved for elites, and the animals caught supplied prestigious meals. Spices such as pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and saffron were highly valued imports that demonstrated wealth and global trade connections. Contrary to popular myth, spices were not used to hide spoiled meat, but to display status and sophistication. Noble feasts emphasized variety, presentation, and spectacle. Multiple courses might include roasted meats, elaborate pies, sweetened sauces, and decorative sugar sculptures. Sweetness in medieval diets came primarily from honey, because refined sugar remained expensive and rare for most of the period. Honey-flavored desserts, drinks, and medicinal preparations. Fruits were sometimes cooked into preserves or baked into pastries among wealthier households. Almond milk was widely used as a substitute during fasting periods, since dairy products were sometimes restricted by religious rules. Medieval cooks demonstrated remarkable creativity in adapting recipes to religious expectations. Urban diets differed slightly from rural ones. Townspeople relied more on markets than self-grown food. Bakers, butchers, fishmongers, and street vendors sold prepared foods. Meat, pies, pastries, and cooked dishes could be purchased by workers who lacked cooking facilities. Guild regulations controlled food quality and prices, though adulteration and fraud still occurred. Bread inspectors ensured loaves met legal weight standards, reflecting how vital bread was to social stability. Food shortages could lead to riots, showing how deeply survival depended on daily meals. Seasonality shaped eating patterns more than anything else. Autumn harvests brought temporary abundance with fresh grains, fruits, vegetables, and occasional slaughtered livestock. Winter diets became monotonous, relying on preserved foods such as salted meat, dried peas, beans, stored root vegetables, and hard cheese. Spring often represented the hungriest period, known historically as the lean months, when stored supplies ran low before new crops matured. Hunger and malnutrition were recurring realities for many medieval families, especially during poor harvest years. Cooking methods remained simple due to limited equipment. Most homes centered around a hearth fire where pots hung over flames. Baking required communal ovens, meaning villagers shared baking schedules. Roasting meat on spits was common in wealthier homes but rare among peasants. Herbs grown in gardens enhanced flavor and served medicinal purposes. Parsley, sage, thyme, rosemary, and mint appeared frequently in recipes. Medieval people believed food influenced health, according to humoral theory, which categorized ingredients as hot, cold, wet, or dry. Meals were sometimes designed to balance bodily humors rather than maximize flavor alone. Monastic communities followed structured eating routines shaped by religious discipline. Monks often ate 2 meals, per unwind, focusing on vegetables, fish, bread, and ale. Meat from 4-legged animals was frequently prohibited, though exceptions existed for the sick. Monasteries became centers of agricultural innovation, improving farming techniques, brewing methods, and food preservation practices that influenced wider society. Children's diets mirrored adult diets, but in smaller portions. From a young age, they ate bread soaked in milk or ale, porridge, and vegetables. Infant mortality remained high partly due to nutritional limitations and disease. Nevertheless, communal eating fostered strong social bonds. Families gathered around shared bowls, rather than individual plates, using knives and hands instead of forks, which were not widely adopted until later centuries. Trade slowly diversified medieval diets over time. Expanding trade routes introduced rice, citrus fruits, improved spices, and new cooking ideas. The Crusades increased European exposure to Middle Eastern ingredients and culinary practices. Sugar gradually became more accessible by the late medieval period, changing dessert traditions. Still, everyday eating habits for the majority remained rooted in local agriculture rather than global luxury. Food scarcity shaped social attitudes toward waste. Leftovers were reused creatively. Stale bread thickened soups, and bones flavored broths. Even noble households practiced forms of redistribution, with excess food given to servants or the poor. Charity meals organized by churches helped prevent starvation among vulnerable populations. Despite hardships, medieval people developed resilient food systems built on cooperation, preservation, and adaptation to environmental challenges. Ultimately, daily eating in medieval times was less about culinary excitement. Food in medieval society also carried strong social symbolism, shaping identity and reinforcing hierarchy at every level of daily life. What someone ate instantly revealed their place in society. The poor lived close to subsistence, eating meals built around necessity rather than choice, while wealthier households transformed food into a display of power and prestige. Yet even among peasants, food culture developed traditions, seasonal rituals, and emotional meanings that went beyond survival. Harvest festivals, religious celebrations, weddings, and village gatherings temporarily transformed ordinary diets into rare moments of abundance. During these events, families might finally taste roasted meat, freshly baked wheat bread, or sweet pastries that were otherwise unimaginable luxuries. Agricultural rhythms determined what appeared on the table throughout the year. Medieval farmers worked according to the natural calendar, ploughing in spring, tending crops in summer, harvesting in autumn, and surviving winter with stored provisions. Wheat, barley, oats, and rye dominated European agriculture because grains were reliable and calorie-dense. These grains were not only baked into bread, but also brewed into ale, boiled into porridge, or ground into flour for dumplings and cakes. Grain storage was crucial. Entire communities depended on granaries, protected from moisture, rodents, and theft. A single failed harvest caused widespread hunger, showing how fragile food security remained. Livestock played an important but carefully managed role in daily diets. Animals were valuable investments rather than constant food sources. Cows provided milk, oxen pulled ploughs, sheep supplied wool, and pigs acted as efficient converters of scraps into meat. Pigs were especially important because they could forage freely in forests, eating acorns and roots. When winter approached, families often slaughtered animals they could not afford to feed through colder months. This seasonal slaughter produced salted pork, sausages, bacon, and preserved fats that sustained households during lean times. Every part of an animal was used: organs, blood, bones, and fat, ensuring nothing went to waste. Cooking smells defined medieval villages and towns. The aroma of baking bread, simmering pottage, roasting onions, and brewing ale-filled narrow streets. Communal ovens became social centres, where neighbours gathered, exchanged news, and maintained bonds of cooperation. Women usually oversaw food preparation, though gender roles varied depending on region and occupation. Preparing meals required skill and planning because fires needed constant tending. Ingredients required preservation, and food shortages demanded creativity. Recipes were rarely written for common people. Knowledge passed orally from generation to generation. Urban markets expanded dietary variety compared to isolated rural villages. Merchants sold fish brought from distant coasts, spices transported along trade routes, and seasonal produce grown in surrounding countryside farms. Market days were lively events where food became intertwined with entertainment, gossip, and economic exchange. Street food existed even in medieval times. Vendors sold hot pies filled with meat or vegetables, fried pastries, roasted nuts, and sweet wafers. For workers and travellers, these foods offered quick nourishment without the need for cooking at home. Bread quality continued to reflect inequality. The finest white bread, called manchet or wastel bread in some regions, was reserved for nobles and wealthy merchants. Middle classes consumed mixed grain loaves, while the poorest relied on coarse bread, sometimes containing beans, peas, or even ground acorns during famine. In desperate years, people added bark flour, wild roots, or other substitutes simply to stretch limited grain supplies. Chronic malnutrition occasionally resulted, especially among populations living near subsistence levels. Religious influence on food cannot be overstated. The medieval church regulated eating patterns through fasting rules that shaped agricultural demand and trade systems. On fasting days, not only meat but sometimes eggs and dairy were forbidden, leading cooks to develop inventive substitutes. Almond milk replaced cow's milk, fish replaced meat, and vegetable oil substituted for animal fats. These restrictions unintentionally diversified medieval cuisine, encouraging experimentation with herbs, grains, and plant-based dishes centuries before modern vegetarian movements. Flavor preferences differed from modern expectations. Medieval cuisine often combined sweet and savory elements in the same dish. Meat might be served with fruit sauces, vinegar, honey, and spices blended together. Strong seasoning helped create complex flavors, but also aligned with medical theories about digestion and bodily balance. Physicians believed certain foods warmed or cooled the body, affecting health and temperament. Thus, diet was seen as part of medicine. Illness treatments frequently involved dietary adjustments rather than pharmaceuticals. The experience of eating itself looked very different from modern dining habits. Forks were rare until the late medieval period, so people ate using knives, spoons, and hands. Thick slices of stale bread, called trenchers, sometimes served as plates, absorbing sauces and juices from food placed upon them. After meals, these soaked trenchers might be eaten or given to the poor. Shared dishes encouraged communal eating, reinforcing social unity, but also spreading disease in crowded environments. Monasteries and convents developed some of the most organized food systems of the medieval world. Monks cultivated extensive gardens filled with vegetables, medicinal herbs, and fruit trees. They raised fish in artificial ponds, brewed beer, baked bread, and recorded agricultural knowledge that later influenced European farming practices. Monastic hospitality traditions ensured travelers and pilgrims received food and shelter, making religious institutions vital providers of daily nourishment across regions. Climate fluctuations significantly affected medieval diets. Periods such as the medieval warm period allowed agricultural expansion and increased food production, while later cooling trends contributed to crop failures and famine. The Great Famine of the early 14th century demonstrated how fragile food systems could collapse under prolonged rain and poor harvests. During such crises, people resorted to eating seed grain, slaughtering breeding animals, or consuming wild plants usually avoided. These desperate choices had long-term consequences for recovery and population health. Children learned food habits early, assisting with planting, harvesting, cooking, and preservation. Food education was practical rather than theoretical. Young people understood which berries were safe, how to salt meat, how to grind grain, and how to maintain storage pits. Survival depended on shared knowledge passed through daily routines, rather than formal schooling. Noble feasting culture represented another extreme of medieval eating. Banquets were carefully staged performances featuring multiple courses, entertainment, music, and elaborate presentation. Dishes might be sculpted into animal shapes, coloured with natural dyes, or served alongside theatrical displays. Exotic ingredients like sugar, rice, citrus, and imported spices demonstrated wealth and global connection. Yet even nobles followed seasonal rhythms. Fresh produce remained limited by agricultural cycles. Despite luxury, sweet dishes gradually became more common as sugar trade expanded. Early sugar was considered a spice and used sparingly. Confections, candied fruits, and marzipan emerged among elite cuisine, laying foundations for later European dessert traditions. Honey cakes and fruit tarts offered occasional indulgence even for modest households during festivals. Regional diversity added complexity to medieval diets. Northern Europe relied more heavily on dairy, oats, and preserved fish, while Mediterranean regions enjoyed olives, wine, figs, and wheat. Based breads, climate-shaped cooking fats as well. Butter dominated cooler climates, while olive oil prevailed in southern regions. Despite differences, shared agricultural realities united medieval eating patterns across continents. Food also played an emotional and spiritual role. Blessings before meals, charity feeding, and communal feasts reinforced religious identity and moral responsibility. Hunger was interpreted through spiritual frameworks, and generosity toward the poor was considered a sacred duty. Kitchens became spaces where faith, family, and survival intersected daily. Over centuries, small innovations slowly improved diets. Crop rotation increased yields, better plows enhanced farming efficiency, and expanding trade networks introduced new ingredients. Still, life remained uncertain, and the memory of hunger shaped cultural attitudes toward food well into later history. People valued preservation, moderation, and gratitude, because abundance could never be taken for granted. By the late medieval period, the foundations of modern European cuisine were quietly forming. Techniques for baking, brewing, cheese, making, and seasoning evolved from centuries of adaptation. The everyday meals of ordinary medieval people, simple bread, humble stews, seasonal vegetables, cheese, and ale, may appear modest today, yet they sustained entire civilizations through war, disease, climate change, and social upheaval. Each meal represented resilience, cooperation, and the enduring human ability to transform limited resources into nourishment and community. In the flickering light of hearth fires across countless villages and towns, medieval families gathered around shared bowls, not seeking luxury but stability, finding comfort in familiar flavors that connected generations through time, labor, and hope. Beyond the rhythms of agriculture and religion, medieval eating habits were deeply connected to the physical environment in which people lived. Forests, rivers, fields, and coastlines all contributed to daily meals, especially for ordinary families who relied on whatever nature offered nearby. Foraging was a normal part of survival. Villagers collected mushrooms, wild berries, herbs, nuts, and edible roots from forests and hedgerows. Knowledge of wild foods was passed carefully between generations, because mistakes could be deadly. Certain mushrooms or plants were poisonous, and recognizing safe varieties required experience, learned through observation rather than written instruction. Wild garlic, sorrel, nettles, and watercress frequently supplemented diets, especially in early spring when stored winter food supplies were nearly exhausted. Fishing was another essential source of nourishment, not only along oceans, but also in rivers, lakes, and ponds. Even small streams became valuable food sources. Simple nets, traps, and fishing lines allowed families to catch eels, trout, and other freshwater species. Eels were particularly prized because they were fatty and could survive transport in barrels. In many regions, rights to fish were strictly controlled by local lords, meaning peasants sometimes risked punishment for secretly fishing to feed their families. Food laws reflected power structures, and hunger occasionally drove people to break them, despite severe penalties. Cooking fats played an important role in flavor and survival. Animal fats such as lard and tallow were widely used in northern Europe, while olive oil dominated Mediterranean cooking. These fats provided necessary calories during periods of heavy labor and cold weather. Without modern refrigeration, fat preservation became essential. Rendered fat could be stored for long periods and added richness to otherwise bland foods. Even small amounts transformed simple vegetables into satisfying meals. Salt was one of the most valuable commodities of the medieval world because it allowed food preservation. Salted fish and meats could travel long distances and survive months without spoiling. Entire trade networks developed around salt production and distribution. Coastal salt pans and inland salt mines became economically powerful centers. Ordinary households guarded salt carefully, using it sparingly to preserve meat, pickle vegetables, or season food. The presence of salt often determined whether a community could survive winter successfully. Medieval breakfast differed significantly from modern expectations. Many people began the day with leftover bread soaked in ale or milk, accompanied by cheese or porridge. Breakfast was sometimes discouraged among elites and clergy, who associated early eating with gluttony, unless justified by labor or illness. Workers, however, needed energy for physically demanding tasks, and ate whenever necessary. The concept of 3 structured meals, per Dalton Y, developed gradually. Medieval people often ate according to work schedules rather than fixed times. Food storage methods reveal how carefully medieval households planned for uncertainty. Root cellars kept vegetables cool underground. Grain was stored in sealed bins raised above ground to prevent moisture damage. Meat hung in smokehouses, where slow exposure to smoke preserved it. Fruits were dried on racks, and cabbage transformed into fermented food similar to modern sauerkraut. Fermentation not only preserved food, but improved nutrition by increasing vitamin availability and preventing spoilage. These techniques allowed communities to endure months when fresh produce disappeared entirely. Social dining customs emphasized hierarchy even within shared meals. In noble households, seating arrangements reflected rank, with the most honored guests seated closest to the lord. Servants and lower, ranking individuals ate different foods or consumed leftovers after the main feast concluded. Table manners evolved gradually, with rules about washing hands before eating, sharing knives responsibly, and avoiding wasteful behavior. Cleanliness held symbolic importance, even if sanitation standards differed from modern expectations. Feast days dramatically interrupted ordinary eating patterns. Religious holidays such as Christmas, Easter, and local saint celebrations brought rare abundance. Communities slaughtered animals, baked special breads, brewed stronger ale, and prepared dishes reserved only for sacred occasions. These feasts strengthened communal identity and offered emotional relief from monotonous diets. Music, storytelling, and games accompanied meals, turning food into celebration rather than mere survival. Medical beliefs strongly influenced food choices. Medieval physicians followed humoral theory, believing health depended on balancing 4 bodily fluids. Foods were categorized as hot, cold, moist, or dry, and meals were planned accordingly. For example, fish might be paired with warming spices, while fruits were eaten cautiously because they were thought to cause imbalance if consumed improperly. Even cooking methods mattered. Roasting was considered drying, boiling moistening. These ideas shaped recipes, meal sequences, and dietary advice for centuries. Food insecurity remained a constant fear. Even in good years, many households lived only one failed harvest away from hunger. Crop disease, war, taxation, or extreme weather could destroy food supplies. Grain prices fluctuated dramatically, sometimes doubling or tripling within months. Bread shortages led to unrest, riots, and political instability. Governments and local authorities attempted to regulate food prices and punish hoarding, recognizing that hunger threatened social order. In castles and noble estates, kitchens operated like organized industries. Large staffs prepared meals for hundreds of residents, including servants, soldiers, guests, and laborers. Specialized roles existed for bakers, brewers, cooks, butchers, and pastry chefs. Massive fireplaces allowed entire animals to be roasted on rotating spits. Sauces thickened with breadcrumbs or almonds accompanied meats. And presentation mattered almost as much as taste. Colorful dishes symbolized wealth. Cooks used saffron for yellow, parsley for green, and berries for red hues. Despite differences between classes, shared ingredients connected all medieval people. Everyone relied on grain, seasonal vegetables, and preserved foods. Even nobles experienced seasonal limitations. Exotic spices enhanced flavor, but could not fully overcome winter scarcity. Fresh fruit in winter remained rare regardless of wealth, demonstrating how deeply nature controlled medieval eating patterns. Travelers experienced food differently from settled communities. Inns and taverns offered simple meals such as bread, cheese, stew, and ale. Pilgrims often depended on charity provided by monasteries or villages along pilgrimage routes. Merchants carried portable foods like dried meat, nuts, and hard bread designed to last weeks without spoiling. These travel foods resembled early forms of preserved rations, emphasizing durability over taste. Food preparation also created sensory experiences central to medieval life. The crackling sound of hearth fires, the smell of baking loaves, the bubbling of stews, and the warmth of communal kitchens shaped daily routines. Cooking required patience, as meals simmered slowly rather than being prepared quickly. Families gathered around fires, not only to eat, but to share stories, repair tools, and maintain social bonds during long evenings. Regional famines left lasting cultural memories. Communities developed traditions emphasizing gratitude and restraint, teaching children never to waste food. Even wealthy households practiced rituals of distributing leftovers to the poor, reinforcing moral responsibility tied to nourishment. Food charity became an essential expression of religious devotion, with monasteries and churches serving meals to travelers, widows, and the elderly. As medieval society approached the Renaissance, gradual changes began altering everyday diets. Improved trade expanded access to spices and luxury ingredients. Agricultural innovation increased productivity in some regions. Urbanization diversified available foods through expanding markets. Yet the core structure of daily eating, bread, pottage, vegetables, dairy, and occasional meat, remained remarkably consistent for centuries. Ultimately, medieval food culture tells a story of endurance shaped by environment, faith, labor, and community. Meals were rarely extravagant for the majority of people, but they carried deep meaning. Every loaf baked, every stew shared, and every preserved harvest represented cooperation between humans and nature. In an era without modern convenience, each meal required planning, skill, and collective effort. Medieval people understood food, not as entertainment or lifestyle choice, but as the fragile foundation of life itself. Through simple ingredients and careful preservation, they built societies capable of surviving generations of hardship, leaving behind culinary traditions that quietly influenced the way the modern world still eats today. The everyday experience of food in medieval life extended far beyond nourishment, shaping how people understood time, labor, family, and even morality. Food preparation began long before cooking itself, starting with planting seeds months earlier and trusting that nature would cooperate. Medieval people lived with constant awareness that every meal represented the success of countless fragile steps. Rainfall arriving at the right moment, crops surviving pests, animals remaining healthy, and storage supplies lasting through winter. This dependence created a deep respect for food rarely seen in modern societies. Even crumbs of bread were treated carefully because wasting food was seen not only as foolish, but morally wrong. Morning activity in medieval households often centered around rekindling the hearth fire. Fires were rarely allowed to die completely because starting a new fire required effort and precious materials. Embers were preserved overnight under ash, so cooking could resume quickly at dawn. The first food prepared usually involved reheating leftovers from the previous evening's pottage or softening bread in warm liquid. Meals were practical and repetitive, yet small variations mattered. A handful of fresh herbs, an egg added to stew, or a piece of salted meat could transform an ordinary day into a memorable one-grain cultivation dominated landscapes across much of medieval Europe. Fields were divided into strips shared among villagers, creating agricultural cooperation out of necessity. Crop rotation systems gradually improved yields, allowing communities to avoid exhausting soil fertility. Barley and oats thrived in colder climates, while wheat flourished in warmer regions. Each grain produced distinct textures and flavors, influencing local food culture. Barley porridge might sustain northern farmers, while wheat bread became central to southern communities. These differences reflected adaptation rather than preference. The process of bread making itself carried almost sacred significance. Bakers rose early to knead dough, allowing yeast fermentation to occur naturally. The smell of baking bread spread through villages, marking one of the most comforting sensory experiences of medieval life. Because ovens consumed large amounts of fuel, many communities relied on communal baking houses. Families prepared dough at home and brought it to shared ovens, turning bread, making into a social event filled with conversation and cooperation. Ale brewing operated alongside bread production because both depended on grain fermentation. Small beer, with very low alcohol content, was consumed daily by adults and children alike. Brewing transformed water into a safer drink while also providing calories. Many households brewed their own ale, adjusting recipes based on available ingredients. Hops gradually became common as a preservative, though earlier medieval ales often relied on herbal mixtures called grut. Brewing knowledge represented an essential domestic skill, often managed by women known as alewives. Vegetable gardens played an equally important role in sustaining daily meals. Almost every household cultivated small plots containing onions, cabbage, beans, leeks, garlic, and medicinal herbs. Gardens ensured access to fresh produce, even when market supplies were limited. Seasonal abundance required careful planning. Surplus vegetables were dried, salted, or fermented for winter consumption. These preservation methods extended nutritional diversity beyond harvest season and protected communities from total reliance on grain stores. Meat consumption remained infrequent for ordinary people, but carried emotional significance when available. Slaughtering animals marked important seasonal events, particularly in autumn when families prepared for winter. Sausage, making, smoking meat, and rendering fat involved entire households working together. These activities transformed perishable livestock into durable food supplies. Even small amounts of preserved meat added depth and flavor to soups throughout colder months. In medieval towns, food culture grew increasingly diverse as trade expanded. Bakers specialized in different types of bread. Pastry makers produced pies filled with meat or fruit, and cooks sold prepared meals to travelers and laborers. Urban food stalls offered early forms of convenience food, allowing busy workers to purchase nourishment quickly. Regulations attempted to maintain quality and prevent cheating, though adulterated food remained a recurring problem. Authorities inspected weights, prices, and ingredients because food shortages could trigger unrest. The role of fasting reinforced discipline within daily eating habits. Religious calendars imposed restrictions that reshaped consumption patterns repeatedly throughout the year. Abstaining from meat encouraged creativity in fish preparation, vegetable dishes, and grain-based meals. These fasting practices also equalized diets temporarily, as even wealthy individuals followed similar restrictions. Shared fasting created a sense of collective participation in spiritual life, linking food directly to faith. Flavor combinations in medieval cooking often surprised modern palates. Sweet, sour, and savory elements blended freely. Vinegar balanced fatty meats. Honey-sweetened sauces and spices added warmth believed to aid digestion. Medieval cooks valued contrast and complexity, influenced by both medical theory and cultural exchange. Recipes emphasized harmony between ingredients rather than strict separation of flavors. Food also played a central role in hospitality customs. Travelers depended on the generosity of strangers, monasteries, and inns for meals and shelter. Offering bread and drink to guests symbolized honor and social responsibility. Refusing hospitality could damage reputations within tightly connected communities. Sharing food established trust and reinforced alliances between families, villages, and political leaders. The experience of hunger shaped medieval storytelling, folklore, and morality tales. Stories warned against greed and celebrated generosity, reflecting societies where scarcity remained a real threat. Festivals and feasts gained emotional power precisely because everyday life involved restraint. Abundant meals during celebrations represented hope, gratitude, and temporary escape from hardship. Children experienced food scarcity differently from adults, often learning early to appreciate seasonal cycles. They understood that berries appeared only briefly, fresh milk varied by season, and certain foods belonged to special occasions. This awareness fostered patience and anticipation rarely present in modern food systems where abundance exists year. Round weather patterns profoundly influenced diets. Excess rain destroyed crops, while drought reduced yields dramatically. Communities interpreted extreme weather through religious or supernatural explanations, praying for favorable conditions, processions, blessings of fields, and communal prayers reflected the deep connection between food security and spiritual belief. Cooking spaces evolved slowly over centuries. Early medieval homes centered entirely around open hearths, while later periods introduced chimneys that improved ventilation. This innovation allowed more controlled cooking and healthier indoor environments. Gradual technological improvements subtly enhanced everyday eating without fundamentally changing the core diet. Even smell played a defining role in medieval food culture. Smoke, fermenting grain, drying herbs, and simmering stews created constant sensory backgrounds. These smells signaled comfort and survival, forming powerful memories associated with home and family. The absence of cooking smells often indicated poverty or famine, highlighting how closely sensory experience tied to well-being. Over time, trade introduced new agricultural products that hinted at future culinary transformations. Rice appeared in limited quantities. Citrus fruits reached elite tables, and refined sugar slowly shifted from medicine to ingredient. Yet these changes touched only a small portion of society. The majority continued to rely on local production and inherited traditions. Despite hardship, medieval people found creativity within limitation. Leftovers became new meals, simple ingredients transformed through skillful cooking, and communal cooperation compensated for scarcity. Food culture evolved not through abundance, but through resilience and adaptation. Families measured wealth, not by variety alone, but by reliability, knowing that tomorrow's meal was secure. As generations passed, daily eating habits shaped cultural identity in lasting ways. Techniques for baking bread, fermenting dairy, brewing ale, and preserving vegetables laid foundations for modern European cuisines. Many contemporary comfort foods trace directly back to medieval kitchens, where practicality guided innovation. What appears simple today represented centuries of experimentation driven by necessity. In the quiet glow of firelit homes, medieval families gathered night after night around shared meals that symbolized endurance. The act of eating together reinforced belonging in uncertain times. Each bowl of stew, each loaf divided among family members, and each sip of ale represented collective survival against unpredictable forces of nature and history. Medieval food was never merely sustenance. It was reassurance that life continued, communities remained strong, and hope endured until the next sunrise and the next harvest. The deeper one looks into medieval daily eating. The clearer it becomes that food structured nearly every aspect of existence, quietly guiding how people worked, rested, socialized, and even understood the passage of life itself. Meals were woven into the rhythm of labor, and hunger acted as a constant reminder of humanity's dependence on land and weather. Medieval people rarely experienced endless variety. Instead, familiarity defined comfort. Eating the same foods day after day did not necessarily feel boring, because stability itself was valuable in a world filled with uncertainty. A reliable bowl of warm pottage or a freshly baked loaf symbolized security more than novelty ever could. Much of medieval life revolved around preparation long before eating occurred. Fields required clearing, ploughing, sowing, and guarding from animals or thieves. Crops demanded careful observation, and families watched the sky constantly, interpreting clouds and winds as signs of future fortune or disaster. When harvest finally arrived, entire communities participated. Men cut grain with sickles, women bundled sheaves, children gathered fallen stalks, and elders supervised storage. Harvest season temporarily transformed diets, bringing fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and sometimes freshly slaughtered meat. These brief moments of abundance stood in sharp contrast to the restraint of winter months. Food preservation required remarkable ingenuity. Medieval households created layered systems to ensure survival through unpredictable seasons. Apples were sliced thin and dried near hearth fires, onions braided and hung from beams, herbs tied into bundles and stored for medicine and flavoring. Fermentation became one of the most powerful tools available. Cabbage turned into sour preserved dishes, milk transformed into cheese that lasted months, and grains fermented into beverages that resisted spoilage. These techniques were not luxuries, but essential survival strategies refined over generations. Daily meals often reflected the concept of stretching ingredients as far as possible. A single piece of meat might flavor an entire pot, rather than serve as a centerpiece. Bones were boiled repeatedly until no nourishment remained, and broth formed the foundation of countless meals. Medieval cooks understood efficiency intuitively. Waste meant risk, and risk meant hunger. This mindset encouraged creativity, producing dishes that maximized nutrition from limited resources. The communal nature of eating defined medieval social life. Families rarely ate alone. Shared bowls placed at the center of tables encouraged cooperation and conversation. Eating together reinforced family hierarchy and social bonds while teaching children manners and responsibilities. Elders often received respected portions, while younger members learned patience and gratitude. Meals functioned as daily ceremonies, reaffirming belonging within household and community. In villages, food production blurred the line between work and domestic life. Women churned butter while supervising children. Men repaired tools while waiting for bread to bake. And neighbors assisted one another during demanding tasks like slaughtering livestock or harvesting grain. Food preparation became collective labor rather than isolated activity. Cooperation increased survival chances, making generosity a practical necessity rather than mere kindness. Medieval markets introduced sensory excitement into otherwise predictable diets. Market days filled towns with the smell of roasting meats, fresh fish, herbs, and baked goods. Farmers travelled from surrounding countryside carrying vegetables, eggs, and dairy products. Traders sold spices, dried fruits, and imported goods that hinted at distant worlds. Even people who could not afford luxury items enjoyed simply seeing and smelling them, turning markets into cultural experiences as much as economic exchanges. Food also reflected regional adaptation to climate challenges. Northern communities relied heavily on preserved foods because growing seasons were short. Southern regions enjoyed longer harvest periods and incorporated olives, grapes, and wheat more consistently. Mountain populations depended on dairy and hardy grains, while coastal areas integrated fish into nearly every meal. These regional diets developed slowly through generations learning how best to survive local conditions. Illness often changed dietary practices. When someone fell sick, meals shifted toward broths, soft bread, and herbal infusions believed to restore balance. Medieval medicine viewed digestion as central to health, so careful attention was paid to food combinations and preparation methods. Physicians prescribed diets tailored to temperament, season, and age. Even emotional states were thought to be influenced by food, linking eating directly to mental well-being. The psychological importance of warm food cannot be overstated. In drafty homes exposed to cold winters, hot meals provided comfort beyond nutrition. The warmth of soup or freshly cooked grains helped people endure harsh climates. Firelight reflecting off steaming bowls created intimate spaces where storytelling flourished. Much of medieval oral tradition developed during evening meals, when families gathered after exhausting days of labor. Festivals amplified the emotional power of food. Weddings, harvest celebrations, and religious holidays allowed communities to temporarily escape strict routines. Special breads shaped into symbolic forms, spiced drinks, roasted animals, and sweet pastries transformed ordinary villages into spaces of celebration. These occasions strengthened social cohesion, reminding people that joy existed alongside hardship. Children's memories of food often centered around these rare moments of abundance. A taste of honey cake, a piece of roasted meat, or fruit preserved in syrup could remain vivid for years. Such experiences shaped cultural nostalgia, reinforcing traditions passed through generations. Even adults carried emotional connections to foods associated with celebration and family unity. Travel exposed people to new culinary practices, gradually spreading ideas between regions. Pilgrims returned home describing unfamiliar dishes, spices, or preparation methods encountered along their journeys. Merchants carried not only goods but knowledge, influencing how communities experimented with flavor and preservation. Over centuries, these exchanges slowly diversified medieval cuisine without abandoning its practical foundations. Food scarcity also fostered resilience. Communities developed systems of mutual aid during difficult times. Wealthier households distributed surplus food, monasteries organized charitable feeding, and neighbors supported one another through failed harvests. Hunger encouraged cooperation because survival depended on shared resources. These traditions laid early foundations for organized social welfare systems in later societies. The sensory world of medieval eating extended beyond taste to sound and texture. The crack of crusty bread breaking, the bubbling of stew, the grinding rhythm of millstones, and the laughter of families around shared tables formed everyday experiences, repeated across generations. Eating involved participation of the entire body and community rather than individual consumption. As the medieval period slowly transitioned toward early modern society, technological and agricultural improvements began increasing food stability. Better plows, expanded crop rotation, and growing trade networks reduced some risks of famine. Yet the essential structure of daily meals remained remarkably consistent. Bread, vegetables, dairy, grains, and occasional meat continued to define everyday nourishment. What stands out most about medieval diets is not luxury or deprivation alone, but balance between necessity and meaning. Food connected people to land, faith, family, and tradition. Every meal carried awareness of effort invested and uncertainty overcome. Medieval individuals may not have enjoyed endless culinary variety, yet they possessed a profound understanding of food's value, rarely experienced in modern abundance. In countless villages illuminated by hearth fires and candlelight, generations lived and died sustained by humble meals prepared with patience and care. The repetition of kneading dough, stirring pots, sharing bread, and giving thanks created continuity across centuries. Medieval people ate not simply to survive another day, but to remain connected to each other, to nature, and to a shared hope that tomorrow's harvest would arrive safely. Through these ordinary meals, entire civilizations endured, proving that history's grandest stories often begin with something as simple as a family gathering around food at the end of a long day. As medieval centuries passed, daily eating habits continued to evolve slowly, shaped less by sudden innovation and more by countless small adjustments made by ordinary people responding to necessity. Food remained inseparable from survival, and each meal reflected accumulated knowledge built across generations. Medieval families understood their environment with remarkable intimacy. They knew which soils produced sweeter vegetables, which months yielded the best milk, and which weather patterns threatened harvests. This awareness shaped cooking decisions long before ingredients ever reached the hearth. Morning hunger often arrived before sunrise. Farmers heading into fields required early nourishment to sustain physical labor that could last until evening. A typical start to the day might involve coarse bread dipped into warm ale or watered wine, accompanied by cheese or leftover grains softened overnight. These meals were practical rather than ceremonial, designed to provide strength quickly. Because labor consumed enormous energy, medieval diets were often higher in calories than modern expectations might suggest, even if variety remained limited. The relationship between humans and animals strongly influenced medieval food culture. Livestock lived close to households, sometimes even sharing indoor spaces during harsh winters. This proximity fostered respect for animals as essential partners in survival. Killing livestock was rarely casual. It followed ritualized practices, acknowledging the importance of the animal's contribution. After slaughter, communities worked rapidly to process meat, turning it into sausages, salted cuts, smoked joints, and preserved fats. The entire process became a communal event, combining labor, skill, and shared responsibility. Cooking fires served as the emotional center of medieval homes. Families gathered around the hearth, not only to prepare food, but to warm themselves, mend clothing, tell stories, and rest after exhausting work. The glow of firelight transformed eating into a moment of safety within uncertain surroundings. Outside, darkness could bring danger from weather, animals, or travelers. But inside the home, shared meals created a sense of protection and continuity. Food preparation also required long-term planning, rarely necessary in modern life. Medieval households constantly calculated how long supplies would last. Grain stores were inspected regularly, cheese rotated to prevent spoilage, and salted meat rationed carefully. Decisions made in autumn determined survival months later. This constant planning fostered discipline and careful resource management that shaped cultural attitudes toward patience and foresight. Flavor enhancement relied heavily on herbs grown locally. Sage, thyme, dill, fennel, parsley, and mint appeared, frequently providing freshness to otherwise repetitive meals. Herbs carried symbolic meanings as well, associated with healing, protection, and seasonal renewal. Kitchens doubled as pharmacies, where plants served culinary and medicinal purposes simultaneously. Knowledge of herbal preparation was often guarded carefully, forming an important aspect of household expertise. Food scarcity influenced emotional behavior within families. Parents sometimes reduced their own portions to feed children during lean periods. Communal eating ensured that everyone received at least something, even if portions were small. Medieval societies valued generosity precisely because resources were limited. Sharing food strengthened trust and reinforced moral obligations between neighbors and relatives. Urban expansion gradually introduced specialized food professions. Bakers, brewers, butchers, cheese makers, and pastry cooks formed guilds regulating quality and training apprentices. These guilds preserved culinary knowledge and maintained standards that protected consumers. Apprentices learned techniques through years of observation, ensuring continuity of skills across generations. The emergence of professional food preparation marked an important shift from purely domestic cooking toward organized culinary economies. Medieval eating also reflected cultural exchange driven by travel, war, and pilgrimage. Soldiers returning from distant campaigns introduced unfamiliar ingredients and cooking styles. Traders carried dried fruits, spices, and preserved delicacies between regions. Pilgrims shared recipes learned along sacred routes. Over time, these exchanges subtly enriched local diets, blending traditions without erasing regional identities. The importance of soup and stew cannot be overstated. These dishes represented efficiency at its highest level. Almost anything edible could be added to a cooking pot: grains, vegetables, herbs, scraps of meat, bones or legumes. Long simmering softened tough ingredients, and blended flavors into nourishing meals capable of feeding large families. The cooking pot symbolized continuity, often remaining on the fire for days as ingredients were added gradually. Eating habits also reflected medieval concepts of moderation. Religious teachings warned against excessive indulgence, framing restraint as a virtue. Even wealthy individuals were expected to demonstrate self-control despite access to abundance. Banquets celebrated prosperity, but were balanced by fasting periods emphasizing humility. These alternating cycles shaped attitudes toward food as both pleasure and responsibility. Weather extremes continually tested food systems. Heavy rains could rot crops in fields, while drought reduced yields dramatically. In response, communities diversified food sources whenever possible. Fishing, hunting small game, gathering wild plants, and maintaining kitchen gardens reduced dependence on single crops. This diversity increased resilience against environmental uncertainty. Food played a significant role in marking stages of life. Birth celebrations included special breads or sweetened drinks. Weddings featured elaborate feasts, symbolizing prosperity, and funerals involved communal meals, honoring the deceased. These traditions reinforced continuity between generations, using shared food experiences to express grief, joy, and collective memory. Children grew up learning not only how to eat, but how food connected to identity. Seasonal tastes became emotional markers of childhood. Fresh berries in summer, roasted roots in autumn, warm broth in winter. These sensory memories linked individuals to place and community throughout their lives. Migration often carried longing for familiar foods left behind, demonstrating how deeply cuisine shaped belonging. Even soundscapes contributed to medieval eating culture. The clatter of wooden bowls, the slicing of bread, the bubbling of stew, and the hum of conversation created recognizable patterns repeated daily. These sounds signaled normalcy and stability. Silence around the table could indicate hardship or mourning, highlighting how food shaped emotional atmosphere. By late evening, families gathered for the day's main meal, often the most substantial nourishment consumed. After hours of labor, eating became a moment of rest and reflection. Stories were shared, plans discussed, and lessons passed to younger generations. Meals reinforced social continuity, ensuring knowledge and values moved forward through time. Gradually, agricultural improvements began increasing food reliability. New ploughing techniques, expanded crop rotation, and improved animal breeding strengthened productivity. While famine never disappeared entirely, many regions experienced growing stability toward the end of the medieval period. These improvements laid foundations for population growth and urban expansion that would define later centuries. Yet, despite gradual change, the essence of medieval eating remained rooted in simplicity. Food came from nearby land, prepared by familiar hands, consumed within close-knit communities. Meals reflected cooperation between humans, animals, soil, and seasons. Medieval people lived with constant awareness that abundance was temporary, and survival depended on respect for natural limits. In homes scattered across fields, villages, and growing towns, generations gathered night after night around modest meals that sustained both body and spirit. Bread broken and shared represented trust. Stew simmering slowly symbolized patience. Preserved harvests reflected hope carried into uncertain winters. Medieval food culture was not defined by extravagance, but by endurance, a quiet testament to humanity's ability to transform simple ingredients into nourishment, comfort, and community across centuries of change. As medieval society moved through centuries of change, the daily experience of eating continued to mirror the fragile balance between hardship and resilience. Food remained inseparable from survival, shaping how people planned their lives from one season to the next. Every household existed within a continuous cycle of anticipation, planting with hope, harvesting with relief, preserving with caution, and consuming with gratitude. Medieval people did not separate food from life. Eating was the physical expression of work already completed and preparation for work yet to come. The early morning atmosphere of a medieval village often carried the smell of damp earth mixed with smoke drifting from hearth fires being revived for the day. Women stirred pots left hanging overnight, reheating thickened stew while children gathered kindling and men prepared tools for the fields. Breakfast was rarely elaborate, yet it carried emotional importance because it marked the beginning of another day survived. A simple combination of bread, porridge, or cheese could determine whether a laborer maintained strength through hours of demanding physical effort. Food preparation demanded patience unfamiliar to modern life. Grinding grain into flour required time and physical strength, often performed using heavy stone querns inside homes when access to mills was limited. The repetitive circular motion of grinding became part of daily routine, accompanied by conversation, storytelling, or song. These rhythms connected domestic labor with cultural expression, showing how food production shaped community identity beyond mere sustenance. Vegetables formed the dependable backbone of everyday meals. Cabbage, turnips, onions, peas, beans, and leeks appeared so frequently that their flavors defined medieval cuisine itself. These vegetables thrived in local climates and stored well through winter, making them essential survival foods. Cooking softened tough fibers and made nutrients easier to digest, especially important for populations engaged in constant physical labor. Medieval people understood through experience which foods sustained energy best. Even without scientific knowledge of nutrition, dairy culture introduced another layer of complexity to daily eating. Milk transformed quickly into butter, curds, and cheese because fresh milk spoiled easily. Cheese varieties differed widely depending on region, season, and animal diet. Hard cheeses provided long-lasting nourishment, while softer varieties were consumed quickly. Butter enriched meals and served as a valuable trade good. The act of churning butter required persistence, often performed collectively while sharing news and reinforcing social bonds. Livestock care created intimate relationships between humans and animals. Shepherds guided flocks through seasonal pastures, ensuring animals found sufficient grazing. Pigs roamed forests, feeding on acorns, while chickens wandered freely near homes. Animals were not distant agricultural units, but daily companions whose well-being directly affected human survival. When animals were eventually slaughtered, the process carried emotional weight balanced by practical necessity. Medieval cooking methods emphasized transformation rather than invention. Boiling allowed cooks to combine multiple ingredients into filling meals using minimal fuel. Roasting, though desirable for flavor, required significant resources and was therefore less common among ordinary families. Stewing became the dominant technique because it extracted maximum nourishment from available ingredients. A pot suspended above the hearth symbolized continuity, often remaining in place for years as generations used it to prepare countless meals. Water sources influenced dietary habits significantly. Wells, streams, and rain collection systems provided essential hydration. Yet contamination remained a constant risk in crowded settlements. Brewing ale and fermenting beverages offered safer alternatives, reinforcing the central role of brewing within domestic life. Children grew accustomed to diluted ale from a young age, making fermented drinks a normal part of everyday nutrition rather than indulgence. The medieval understanding of appetite differed from modern concepts. Hunger was familiar, expected, and sometimes unavoidable. People learned to tolerate discomfort during lean seasons, developing psychological resilience shaped by necessity. Gratitude accompanied moments of abundance, because scarcity remained within living memory. This relationship with food fostered cultural values, emphasizing humility, moderation, and respect for resources. Markets expanded social interaction around food. Farmers arriving at dawn displayed baskets of vegetables, eggs, and cheese, while fishmongers called attention to fresh catches transported overnight. The marketplace provided one of the few spaces where individuals from different social classes encountered each other regularly. Even those who purchased little experienced excitement, simply witnessing variety beyond their usual diet. Cooking smells define medieval neighborhoods. The scent of onions frying in fat, bread baking in communal ovens, or herbs simmering in broth created familiar sensory landscapes. These smells communicated prosperity or hardship without words. A village filled with cooking aromas suggested successful harvests, while absence of such smells hinted at scarcity or illness affecting the community. Food customs also reflected emotional care within families. Parents prepared softer foods for elderly relatives whose teeth weakened with age. Mothers created nourishing broths for children recovering from illness. Special dishes marked personal milestones, reinforcing love and belonging through nourishment. Food became a language through which affection and responsibility were expressed daily. Religious influence continued shaping meal timing and content. Prayer before eating reinforced awareness that survival depended on divine favor as much as human effort. Monastic communities formalized eating schedules, emphasizing silence and reflection during meals. Even outside monasteries, spiritual awareness infused daily dining habits, reminding people that food carried moral significance alongside physical nourishment. Travelers moving between regions encountered differences that broadened culinary awareness. Coastal diets rich in fish contrasted with inland grain, heavy meals, while warmer regions offered fruits rarely seen in colder climates. These encounters gradually expanded collective understanding of food possibilities, contributing to slow culinary evolution across centuries. Children's participation in food preparation ensured survival skills transferred seamlessly between generations. They learned to recognize ripe crops, preserve surplus, and cook basic meals long before adulthood. Education occurred through practice rather than instruction manuals, embedding food knowledge deeply within cultural memory. Even the act of storing food required careful architectural planning. Barns, smokehouses, cellars, and granaries represented critical infrastructure protecting communities from famine. Successful storage transformed temporary harvest abundance into year-long security. Families inspected stores regularly, guarding against mold, rodents, or theft. The emotional climax of each day often arrived at the evening meal. After labor concluded, families gathered around shared food, releasing tension accumulated through work. Conversation, laughter, and storytelling accompanied eating, turning nourishment into social restoration. These moments strengthened emotional resilience necessary for facing uncertainty again the next day. Gradually, medieval food culture contributed to broader societal transformation. Agricultural stability supported population growth, urban expansion, and economic development. Culinary practices refined through necessity later influenced professional cooking traditions, emerging in early modern Europe. Many techniques still used today, fermentation, baking, cheese, making, and slow cooking, originated from medieval experimentation driven by survival. Despite hardship, medieval people cultivated appreciation for simple pleasures. Fresh bread breaking open, with steam rising, a bowl of warm soup after cold rain, or sweet fruit tasted at peak ripeness, created genuine happiness. These experiences required no extravagance. They emerged naturally from connection to land and community. In the end, everyday medieval eating tells a story of endurance, shaped by cooperation and patience. Meals represented more than nutrition. They embodied memory, faith, labor, and hope. Across centuries marked by uncertainty, families continued gathering around fires, sharing humble food prepared with care. Through repetition of these daily rituals, medieval societies preserved stability and identity, proving that civilization is sustained not only by grand achievements, but by countless ordinary meals, quietly sustaining human life generation after generation. Daily eating in medieval times was also shaped by sound, rhythm, and repetition, creating a predictable structure around which life unfolded. The ringing of church bells often signaled when people paused work to eat, pray, or rest. Meals were closely tied to daylight hours because artificial lighting was limited and expensive. Families rose at dawn, consumed simple morning food, worked through long hours, and gathered again at dusk for the main meal. Food preparation itself demanded time and cooperation. Grinding grain into flour required either hand-operated querns or visits to communal mills controlled by local lords, where peasants paid taxes in grain. The act of turning harvested crops into edible food represented a long chain of labor involving farmers, millers, bakers, brewers, and cooks. Grain processing determined much of everyday life. Milling transformed hard kernels into flour, suitable for bread and porridge, but access to mills was tightly regulated. Lords often required peasants to use specific mills, collecting fees that reinforced feudal authority. Flour quality varied greatly, depending on how finely it was ground and how much bran remained. Dark bread contained more nutrients, but was associated with poverty, while refined white flour symbolized wealth, even though it removed valuable fiber and minerals. This contrast revealed how social prestige sometimes outweighed nutritional value. The medieval kitchen environment differed dramatically from modern kitchens. Smoke from open hearth fires filled homes constantly, darkening walls and ceilings. Cooking tools were simple: iron pots, wooden bowls, clay vessels, knives, ladles, and occasionally metal pans for wealthier households. Heat control was difficult, so cooking relied heavily on experience rather than precise measurement. Recipes described processes vaguely, assuming cooks already understood techniques passed through tradition. Meals often cooked slowly throughout the day, allowing flavors to develop while freeing people to perform other tasks. Food safety was an ongoing challenge. Without refrigeration, ingredients spoiled quickly, especially during warm months. People relied on smell, taste, and appearance to judge whether food remained edible. Fermentation, salting, and drying reduced risks, but could not eliminate them entirely. Illness caused by spoiled food was common, though medieval people interpreted sickness through spiritual or humoral explanations, rather than microbial understanding. Despite limitations, many preservation methods were surprisingly effective, allowing communities to store food for months. Another important aspect of medieval diets was texture. Much of everyday food was soft or semi-liquid because cooking methods emphasized boiling and stewing. Pottage, porridge, and soups required less fuel and made tough ingredients easier to digest. Elderly people, children, and laborers all benefited from meals that were filling yet simple to chew. Hard crusts of bread were sometimes softened in broth or ale before eating. The consistency of food reflected practical considerations rather than culinary preference. Seasonal hunger deeply influenced emotional relationships with food. Winter scarcity taught patience and gratitude. Spring hunger created anxiety as supplies dwindled before new crops appeared. When fresh vegetables finally returned, communities celebrated renewal, not only spiritually, but physically. The first green shoots symbolized survival after months of monotony. These cycles shaped medieval psychology, reinforcing humility toward nature and awareness of dependence on successful harvests. Food preparation also played a role in gender identity and household organization. Women typically managed cooking, dairy processing, and garden cultivation, though men participated in large-scale food production such as farming, hunting, and brewing. Skills like cheese making, bread baking, and herb preservation elevated women's importance within communities. Knowledge of herbs served both culinary and medicinal purposes, blending cooking with healthcare. Many remedies involved soups, broths, or infused drinks believed to restore balance within the body. Markets expanded access to spices and specialty foods, even for people who could not afford luxury ingredients regularly. Pepper, ginger, and cinnamon occasionally appeared in urban kitchens in small quantities, used sparingly to enhance flavor. Spices held symbolic value because they connected Europe to distant lands through trade routes extending to Asia and the Middle East. Even a small pinch transformed an ordinary dish into something extraordinary, demonstrating the growing interconnectedness of medieval economies. The role of smell and taste in medieval life cannot be overlooked. Strong flavors were appreciated because preservation techniques sometimes altered natural tastes. Smoked meats, fermented vegetables, sour breads, and tangy cheeses created complex flavor profiles. Sweetness remained rare and precious, making honey-based treats deeply memorable. Festivals featuring sweet cakes or spiced wine stood out vividly against the background of everyday simplicity. Eating spaces varied widely. Peasants often ate seated on benches or stools around a shared table or even standing near the hearth. Nobles dined in large halls illuminated by candles and decorated with tapestries. Yet regardless of setting, meals functioned as social anchors. Eating together reinforced family unity, strengthened alliances, and maintained social hierarchy. Hospitality carried moral importance. Offering food to guests demonstrated honor and generosity. Food waste was minimized because survival depended on efficiency. Vegetable scraps fed animals. Stale bread thickened soups, and bones boiled repeatedly for broth. Even ashes from hearth fires contributed to household tasks such as soap making. Medieval households operated as closed systems where resources circulated continuously. Modern concepts of disposable food would have seemed unimaginable in a world where every calorie mattered. Travel and warfare influenced diets as well. Soldiers relied on preserved foods like hard bread, salted meat, dried peas, and cheese. Armies moved slowly, partly because transporting food required massive logistical effort. Siege warfare often revolved around starvation rather than direct combat, proving how food availability determined military outcomes. Civilians trapped in besieged cities endured extreme hunger, sometimes resorting to desperate measures that became grim historical legends. Education about food extended beyond survival into moral philosophy. Religious teachings warned against gluttony, while encouraging moderation and gratitude. Fasting periods trained individuals to control appetite and reflect spiritually. Monks wrote detailed texts describing agricultural practices, brewing techniques, and gardening knowledge, preserving culinary traditions for future generations. These writings contributed to the gradual professionalization of cooking during later centuries. Children experienced food as part of learning responsibility. They helped collect eggs, herd animals, weed gardens, and gather firewood necessary for cooking. Food preparation taught patience and cooperation. Family survival depended on collective effort, and shared meals reinforced awareness that nourishment resulted from hard work rather than convenience. Regional identities formed around distinctive foods. Coastal populations developed strong traditions of fish consumption. Mountain communities relied heavily on dairy and preserved meats, and fertile plains supported grain-based diets. Over time, these patterns evolved into recognizable cuisines that still influence modern European cooking traditions. Many contemporary dishes trace their origins directly to medieval peasant foods refined over centuries. The emotional comfort provided by food remained universal despite hardship. Warm soup after cold labor, fresh bread emerging from an oven, or shared ale at day's end offered moments of relief and satisfaction. Medieval people did not experience food primarily as luxury, but as reassurance, a sign that life continued, despite uncertainty. Meals represented stability in a world frequently disrupted by disease, war, and unpredictable weather. As trade expanded toward the end of the medieval era, new ingredients slowly transformed daily eating. Improved shipping brought citrus fruits, refined sugar, and new cooking ideas into European kitchens. Urban populations grew, encouraging professional cooks and specialized food production. Yet beneath these changes, the essence of medieval eating endured. Reliance on seasonal produce, respect for preservation, communal sharing, and deep awareness of nature's power over human survival. In countless homes illuminated by firelight, medieval families repeated the same rituals day after day, kneading dough, stirring pots, slicing cheese, pouring ale, and gathering around modest tables. These routines connected generations through shared experience, shaping cultures that valued resilience, cooperation, and gratitude. The ordinary meals of medieval people, humble though they were, formed the quiet foundation upon which societies endured for centuries, proving that history is not only written in battles and kings, but also in the simple act of people coming together to eat, survive, and hope for tomorrow's harvest.